Every morning for 69 years, a woman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, named Mabel Jenkins woke up at 5:15, pressed her right hand flat against her chest, and felt something she could never explain. A second heartbeat. Not a murmur, not an arrhythmia. Her doctors checked 3 times over the decades and found nothing wrong. It was just there, faint and steady, beating half a second behind her own, as if someone, somewhere in the world, was keeping time with her. And every morning for 69 years, a woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, named Dorothy Pierce, did the exact same thing. Same time, same hand, same unexplainable second pulse. On January 18, 2024, both women walked onto the Family Feud stage from opposite sides, saw each other's faces for the first time in their lives, and the studio watched as 2 69-year-old women who had never known the other existed took 4 steps, collapsed into each other's arms, and didn't let go for 6 minutes and 42 seconds.
Steve Harvey stood 7 feet away, with tears running off his jaw, and said 5 words into a microphone that 390 million people would eventually hear. God kept your other half. The women were identical twins, separated at birth in 1955, adopted into different families in different states, and they had just found each other on the set of a game show because a 23-year-old granddaughter submitted 2 applications to Family Feud without telling either grandmother what she had discovered in an Ancestry DNA database 4 months earlier. It was January 18, 2024, in Atlanta, Georgia, and the studio was set for a standard Thursday taping. The Jenkins family from Baton Rouge occupied stage left. Mabel, 69, her son Arthur, 44, her daughter-in-law Teresa, her grandson Deshaun, and her granddaughter Keely, 23.
The Pierce family from Tulsa occupied stage right. Dorothy, 69, her daughter Francine, 46, her son-in-law Walter, her grandson Malik, and her granddaughter Aaliyah, 21. The 2 families had never met. They exchanged polite waves during warm-ups. The producers noted in the pre-show briefing that both team captains were 69-year-old black women of similar height and build. But game shows are full of coincidences, and no one thought more of it. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. Mabel Jenkins was born on March 3, 1955, at a charity hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana. She was adopted at 6 weeks old by Roosevelt and Hattie Jenkins, a farming couple in Baton Rouge who had been on a state adoption waiting list for 4 years. The adoption paperwork listed Mabel as a single birth. There was no mention of a sibling. Roosevelt and Hattie raised Mabel on 40 acres of sugarcane land east of the city. Mabel grew up churning butter, feeding chickens, and singing hymns in a clapboard church on Sundays. She married James Jenkins in 1976. James worked at the Exxon refinery. They had 1 son, Arthur. James died of a heart attack in 2003 at the age of 49, sitting in his recliner watching Monday Night Football. Mabel found him when she came back from the kitchen with 2 bowls of gumbo. One bowl was still warm when the paramedics arrived. She kept that bowl on the counter for 3 days before she could bring herself to pour it out. Dorothy Pierce was born on March 3, 1955, at the same charity hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana, 11 minutes after Mabel. She was adopted at 8 weeks old by Clarence and Ida Pierce, a postal worker and a school teacher in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The adoption paperwork listed Dorothy as a single birth, no mention of a sibling. Dorothy grew up reading library books, pressing flowers between dictionary pages, and singing in a Baptist choir on Sundays. She married Leonard Pierce in 1977. Leonard was an electrician. They had 1 daughter, Francine. Leonard died in 2005 of kidney failure. He was 51. Dorothy was holding his hand when it happened. She told the nurse she felt the moment he left because the room got lighter, like someone had opened a window that wasn't there. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. The 2 women lived 520 miles apart for 69 years. They never crossed paths. They never had reason to. But the similarities between their lives were so precise, so structurally identical, that when the full story was eventually told on that stage, a geneticist at Tulane University would contact the Family Feud production office and request permission to study the case. Both women married at age 21.
Both women had their first child at age 23. Both women lost their husbands to sudden medical events in their late 40s.
Both women were widowed within 2 years of each other. Both women sang alto in their church choirs. Both women kept a garden in their backyard and grew the same 3 vegetables: okra, collard greens, and Roma tomatoes. Both women had a habit of humming the same hymn, "His eye is on the sparrow," while they cooked. Both women pressed their right hand to their chest every morning and felt a second heartbeat that no doctor could explain. These details would not emerge for another 40 minutes. At 10:15 in the morning, as the taping was about to begin, the 2 women simply stood at their podiums and waited. But Keely Jenkins, 23 years old, standing at position 5 on the Jenkins team, was shaking so hard that her cousin Deshaun put his hand on her back and whispered, "You okay?" Keely nodded. She was not okay. She was 4 minutes away from detonating a secret she had carried for 4 months. A secret that had started with a Christmas present and ended with a DNA match that reordered 2 entire families. In September 2023, Keely Jenkins gave her grandmother Mabel an Ancestry DNA kit as an early birthday gift. Mabel spat in the tube, laughed about it, and forgot about it within a week. Keely submitted the sample. 6 weeks later, the results came back with a notification that made Keely drop her phone on the kitchen floor. The database had found a 99.98% DNA match with another user. Not a cousin, not a half-sibling, an identical twin. The matched profile belonged to a woman named Dorothy Pierce in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was 69 years old. She had submitted her own DNA kit a year earlier as a gift from her granddaughter, Aaliyah. Keely stared at the screen for 20 minutes. Then she called Aaliyah Pierce. She found her through the Ancestry messaging system. The phone call lasted 3 hours. They compared photographs. They compared birth dates. They compared adoption records. Both women had been born at the same hospital on the same day. Both adoption files listed the birth as a single delivery. Somewhere in 1955, in a charity hospital in Shreveport, someone had separated 2 identical twin girls and sent them to different families in different states and recorded each one as an only child. Keely and Aaliyah made a pact. They would not tell their grandmothers, not yet. Keely had an idea. She applied both families to Family Feud. She submitted 2 separate applications with 2 different family names from 2 different states. The casting department, which processes over 100,000 applications a year, had no mechanism to cross-reference DNA connections between applicant families. Both families were accepted for the same taping day. Keely made sure of that by requesting January dates for both and confirming the overlap with a casting coordinator she befriended over email. She told Mabel it was a surprise trip to Atlanta. Aaliyah told Dorothy the same thing. Neither grandmother questioned it. Neither grandmother had any idea that on the other side of the stage, separated by 40 feet of studio floor, stood the other half of a heartbeat she had been feeling for 69 years. The audience thought that was the peak. They were wrong. The game started normally. Steve introduced both families. He shook Mabel's hand. He shook Dorothy's hand. He did not notice the resemblance because the lighting was different on each side, and he was reading from his cue cards, and the pace of a taping doesn't allow for long looks. The first round went to the Pierce family. The second round went to the Jenkins family. Between rounds, during a 30-second reset, Mabel glanced across the stage at Dorothy for the first time. Her hand went to her chest. She pressed it flat against her sternum. Across the stage, Dorothy's hand did the same thing at the same moment. Neither woman saw the other do it. But Camera 4 captured both gestures in a split screen that would later become the single most shared image from the episode. 2 women, identical in posture, identical in gesture, touching their own chests at the same second, reaching for a heartbeat they had never been able to name. Round 3. Steve asked the survey question to both team captains at the face-off podium. Mabel and Dorothy stood 3 feet apart for the first time in their lives. Steve looked at them. He stopped. His cue card stayed in his hand. He looked at Mabel. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at Mabel again. His head tilted. "Hold on," he said. "Hold on 1 second." The audience laughed, expecting a joke. Steve wasn't laughing.
He was looking at two faces that were the same face. Same bone structure, same brow line,
Same distance between the eyes. Same slight downturn at the corners of the mouth. Same hands pressed at the same angle against the same spot on the chest. "Are y'all related?" Steve said. Mabel said, "No, sir." Dorothy said, "I've never met this woman." Steve looked at them for 5 more seconds. He shook his head. He said, "That's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen on this show." He read the question. The round continued. But Steve kept looking at them. Something was pulling at him like a thread he couldn't find the end of. At the commercial break after round 3, Keely Jenkins walked to center stage. She hadn't been called. She hadn't been prompted. She walked to the middle of the floor, turned to face the audience and said, "Mr. Harvey, can I say something before the next round?" Steve said, "We're on a break, sweetheart, but go ahead." Steve Harvey would later call what happened next the most important moment of his career. Keely looked at her grandmother. Then she looked at Dorothy. Then she looked at Steve and said, "These two women are identical twins. They were separated at birth 69 years ago. Neither one of them knows." The studio fell completely silent. Steve's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at Mabel. He looked at Dorothy. Mabel was staring at Keely. Dorothy was staring at Keely. Neither woman moved. Neither woman breathed visibly. 69 years of an unexplainable second heartbeat suddenly had a name, and that name was standing 3 feet away in a matching body, with a matching face and matching hands pressed against a matching chest. Dorothy spoke first. She turned to Mabel. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the studio was so silent that every microphone in the building caught it. She said, "It's you." Mabel's knees buckled. Arthur caught her. Dorothy's knees buckled. Francine caught her. Both women were held upright by their children for 3 seconds, and then both women pulled free at the same instant and walked toward each other. 4 steps each. They met in the center of the stage. Mabel's hands came up to Dorothy's face. Dorothy's hands came up to Mabel's face. They held each other's faces the way you hold something you've been looking for your entire life and found in the last place you expected. Then they collapsed into each other. Arms wrapped around bodies that were built from the same blueprint, foreheads pressed together, and they wept. Not cried, wept. The kind of weeping that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name, a place that existed before language, before memory, before the moment in 1955 when someone decided that 1 baby was enough per file. 6 minutes and 42 seconds. The production assistant timed it. Neither woman let go. The audience didn't clap. The audience didn't make a sound. 270 people watched 2 69-year-old women hold each other on a game show stage, and every single one of them understood they were witnessing something that had been waiting to happen since March 3, 1955. Steve Harvey was standing 7 feet away. Tears ran off his jaw and hit his suit jacket. He didn't wipe them. He didn't move. When the women finally separated enough to look at each other, Steve walked to them and said the 5 words, "God kept your other half." The studio fell completely silent again. Then it erupted. The sound was not applause. It was a collective exhale that became a roar that became something closer to a hymn than a cheer. Steve turned to his producers. His earpiece was still in. He didn't remove it. He didn't need to. The lead producer was already nodding. "Shut it down," Steve said. "We're done taping today. This is the only thing that matters." Production stopped. The remaining scheduled games were postponed. The studio belonged to Mabel and Dorothy now. But Steve wasn't done. He sat both women down in chairs at center stage. He asked Keely to tell the full story. Keely spoke for 8 minutes. She told the audience about the DNA kit, the 99.98% match, the phone call with Aaliyah, the pact, the dual applications, the coordinated taping date. She explained that both grandmothers' adoption records listed them as single births. She explained that the charity hospital in Shreveport had closed in 1971, and its records had been partially destroyed in a flood, making it nearly impossible to trace the separation. She explained that she and Aaliyah had spent 4 months planning this moment, and that neither of them had slept the night before. Steve asked Mabel about the heartbeat.
Mabel pressed her hand to her chest and said, "I've felt it my whole life. Every morning. A second one, right behind mine. My doctor said it was nothing, but I knew it was something."
I just didn't know it was someone. Dorothy pressed her own hand to her chest.
"Me too," she said. "Every single morning, 5:15, same time." She looked at Mabel. "You too?" 5:15, Mabel said. The studio fell completely silent for the third time. A sound technician removed his headphones and set them on the floor. Camera operator Jesse Whitfield, who had been filming Family Feud for over a decade, later told a reporter that his hands were shaking so badly he wasn't sure the footage would be usable. Steve asked them to share things about their lives. The parallels poured out. Married at 21, first child at 23. Husbands died within 2 years of each other. Church choir, alto section, okra, collard greens, Roma tomatoes. His eye is on the sparrow. Each revelation hit the audience like a wave. By the time Dorothy said she hummed while she cooked and Mabel said, "Sparrow?"
And Dorothy's hand flew to her mouth.
A woman in the audience fainted and had to be attended to by a medic. And then Mabel said something no one was prepared for. She looked at Dorothy and said, "When James died, I kept his bowl of gumbo on the counter for 3 days because I couldn't pour it out." Dorothy's face crumbled. She grabbed Mabel's arm. "Leonard," she said. "When Leonard died, I kept his coffee cup on the nightstand for a week. I couldn't wash it. His lips were the last thing that touched it." 2 women who had never met, grieving husbands they had lost 20 years apart, processing their widowhood in the same language of objects left untouched. Bowls and cups holding the shape of someone who was gone. But Steve wasn't done. He pulled out his phone. He called Oprah Winfrey live on stage. Steve explained the story in 2 minutes. Oprah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Steve, how many more twins are out there right now who don't know?"
Steve looked at Mabel and Dorothy. Neither woman had an answer. Oprah said, "Then we find them." She committed $500,000 on that call to fund a DNA reunification initiative specifically for adoptees separated at birth before 1980, when records were routinely sealed, falsified, or destroyed. The initiative would partner with Ancestry and 23andMe to offer free testing to adoptees over the age of 50. Steve turned to both families, every Jenkins, every Pierce. He looked at them and said, "You're not 2 families anymore. You understand that, right? You're one family that got split in half and spent 69 years finding its way back." He addressed the camera. "Everyone watching at home, if you were adopted and you've never taken a DNA test because you were afraid of what you might find, if you press your hand to your chest some mornings and feel something you can't explain, if you've spent your whole life knowing something was missing but you couldn't put a name on it, take the test, find the name, because somewhere in this world there might be a woman who hums the same song, grows the same garden, and wakes up at the same time every morning, reaching for a heartbeat that belongs to you." He turned back to Mabel and Dorothy. He knelt in front of them. His voice dropped. "Let me tell you something. I know what it's like to feel like half of you is missing, and you can't find it anywhere. When I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo for 3 years, sleeping in parking lots, showering in gas station bathrooms, I used to press my hand against my chest every night and ask God to show me where the rest of me was. The part of me that was supposed to be something. The part of me that believed. I couldn't find it. For 3 years, I couldn't find it." Steve paused. His eyes were red. "And then one day, I did. And it wasn't in a mirror. It wasn't in a bank account. It was in another person's face. Just like this. Just like you two finding each other right here on this stage. Because God doesn't lose people, Mabel. He holds them. Sometimes he holds them for 69 years, but he never lets go." Both families received the full $25,000 prize. Steve added $20,000 from his personal account, $10,000 to each family. The Delgado family scheduled for the next taping slot, who had been watching from the green room monitor, sent a note to the stage through a production assistant that read, "We don't need to play today. Give our slot to those women. We'll come back anytime." The episode was fast-tracked for broadcast. It aired on February 4th, 2024.
The full clip was released on YouTube the same evening. Within 36 hours, it had 212 million views. Within 10 days, 390 million. The hashtag God kept your other half trended in 67 countries for 19 days.
It became the most shared Family Feud clip of the year. Ancestry reported a 470% increase in DNA kit purchases among adults over 50 in the month following the broadcast. 12,000 adoptees contacted the Oprah-funded reunification initiative within its first 90 days. In April 2024, a researcher at Tulane University's genetics department published a preliminary study on Mabel and Dorothy's case. The study documented 37 behavioral and lifestyle parallels between the twins, making it one of the most extensively matched cases of separated identical twins in American scientific literature. The phenomenon of the synchronized heartbeat sensation, which both women had reported independently for decades, became the subject of a separate neurological investigation. Steve Harvey established the Other Half Foundation in March 2024, named after the 5 words he said on stage. The foundation's mission was to fund DNA testing, record reconstruction, and reunification support for adoptees separated before 1980. In its first 2 years, the Other Half Foundation raised $19.4 million and facilitated the reunification of over 1,400 separated siblings, including 61 pairs of twins. Mabel moved to Tulsa in June 2024. She sold the house in Baton Rouge where she had lived for 41 years. She bought a house 3 blocks from Dorothy's. They cooked dinner together every Sunday. They sang in the same choir. They grew the same garden in Dorothy's backyard: okra, collard greens, Roma tomatoes. Side by side, 2 plots touching at the edge. Arthur and Francine, who had grown up as only children in different states, now spoke on the phone every Wednesday evening. Deshawn and Malik discovered they both played chess and started a weekly online match that neither of them ever won, because they played to identical draws so often that they finally accepted it was genetic. Keely and Aaliyah, the 2 granddaughters who had orchestrated the reunion, were profiled in Time magazine. The article asked Keely what the hardest part of keeping the secret had been. She said, "Watching Grandma press her hand to her chest every morning and knowing the heartbeat had a name, and I couldn't say it yet." Mabel was interviewed by a local news station in Tulsa 7 months after the reunion. The reporter asked her what it felt like to meet Dorothy for the first time. Mabel thought for a long time. Then she said, "It didn't feel like meeting someone new. It felt like remembering someone I'd always known. Like waking up from a dream where you lost something, and then you open your eyes and it's right there on the nightstand." Dorothy was asked the same question separately. She said, "I pressed my hand to my chest that morning, same as always. And for the first time in 69 years, there was only one heartbeat, because the other one was standing right next to me." Steve Harvey told People magazine in an interview 6 months after the episode aired, "I've made people laugh for 30 years. I've hosted shows that hundreds of millions of people watched. And the greatest thing I've ever done was stand on a stage and watch 2 women find each other after 69 years apart, and understand that I had absolutely nothing to do with it. That was God's show. I was just the man holding the microphone." In Tulsa, Oklahoma, on a quiet street lined with pecan trees, there are 2 houses 3 blocks apart. Every morning at 5:15, 2 women wake up at the same time. They used to press their hands to their chests. They don't do that anymore. Instead, one of them picks up the phone and calls the other. And the first thing she says every single morning is, "Good morning, sister." And the other says it back. And then they talk. About the garden, about the grandchildren, about the weather, about nothing, about everything. About 69 years of mornings when the phone didn't ring, and the hand pressed against the chest, and the second heartbeat pulsed with no name attached to it. The calls last between 4 minutes and 40 minutes. Neither woman has missed a day. Neither woman intends to. Some people believe that time lost is gone forever. But every person who watched 2 69-year-old women walk toward each other on a game show stage with matching faces and matching hands and matching gardens and matching hymns understood something that no clock can measure.
time doesn't disappear. It waits. It holds its breath.
And when the moment finally comes, it gives back every second it borrowed, all at once, in the space between 4 steps and an embrace that lasts 6 minutes and 42 seconds, and somehow 69 years. If this story reminded you that the people you're missing might be looking for you too, subscribe to this channel. Every week we share the moments when a stage becomes a mirror and a game becomes a reunion, and 2 strangers discover they were never strangers at all. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and send this to someone who presses their hand to their chest in the morning and feels something they can't explain. The explanation might be closer than they think.